Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of God. In this one verse, we see the entire identity, purpose, and mission of a man who was once an enemy of Christ. This verse demands our attention and forces us to ask, who am I serving? What am I called to do? And have I been separated to the gospel of God? Paul calls himself a bondservant of Jesus Christ. That term isn't poetic or symbolic, it means slave. A slave is owned, controlled, and bound to the will of his master. Paul wasn't boasting, he was declaring his position. He didn't live for his own dreams, his own plans, or his own desires. He lived for the one who bought him. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verses 19 through 20 says, "You are not your own, you were bought at a price." The modern church has lost sight of this reality. Many today want Jesus as a friend, but reject him as Lord. Let it be known, if Christ is not your master, then sin is. Jesus declared in John chapter 8 verse 34, "Whoever commits sin is a slave of sin." You are a slave one way or another. The only question is, who owns you? Paul was called to be an apostle. He didn't chase after this title, it was given to him by God. When God calls, there is no room for negotiation. Acts chapter 9 verses 3 through 6 tells us that Paul was blinded, thrown to the ground, and commanded by Jesus to rise and go. That's what the call of God looks like. It is not a polite request. It is a sovereign command. Have you answered that call, or are you still running from it? Romans chapter 8 verse 30 says, "Those he predestined, he also called." You may claim to be called, but if your life is not marked by surrender and obedience, you are only fooling yourself. Paul says he was separated to the gospel of God. That word separated means cut off or set apart. It's not just separation from sin, but to God's purpose. Philippians chapter 3 verses 7 through 8 reveals Paul's heart. "But what things were gained to me, these I have counted loss for Christ." Everything Paul once valued, his status, his success, his reputation, he considered worthless compared to knowing Christ. Can you say the same? Have you been separated from the world, or are you still clinging to its lies? James chapter 4 verse 4 says, "Friendship with the world is enmity with God." If you are not separated from the world, you are at war with God. Finally, Paul says he was separated to the gospel of God. Notice it's not Paul's gospel, not man's gospel, but the gospel of God. It is the divine message that proclaims all men are sinners, condemned to die, but that Christ died in their place, was buried, and rose again. Paul was chained to that gospel not as a man forced against his will, but as one compelled by the grace of God. Galatians chapter 1 verses 8 through 9 says, "If anyone preaches another gospel, let him be accursed." There is one gospel, it is God's gospel. Any alteration to it is heresy. So ask yourself, are you a slave of Jesus Christ? If you're still living for your own desires, you have not bowed the knee. Have you answered his call? If you are running from his command, judgment awaits. Have you been separated to the gospel? If you're still attached to the world, you are at odds with God. The message is clear. Surrender now or face him as judge later. Whose slave are you?